Hi, I'm Kristen Hodgden, IVF mom, proud women's health advocate, and co-founder of Rescripted.
And I'm Dr. Jenna Khan, a board-certified OBGYN, fertility specialist, and mom of two.
And from first period to last period, we're diving into the women's health topics that matter most, from periods and fertility to pregnancy and menopause.
Through expert interviews and candid conversations, we're empowering women to take charge of their health by expanding the discussion beyond what's typically covered in the doctor's office.
It's time to stop guessing when it comes to our health. Now let's dive in for the real science-backed info you need to be the expert in you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to From First Period to Last Period. Jenna just had to take a break from recording to do an embryo transfer, so hope that went well.
Yeah, it went great. It was beautiful.
rooting for all of the positive pregnancy tests as always. So we have a great episode for you today. Abby, my co-founder, is going to be sharing her story a little bit later. But first I have to say that I got my first postpartum period like 6 days ago, and you won't believe that I ovulated on my own.
It's like after all of that.
7 years of infertility, 3 IVF babies, 2 egg retrievals, 8 transfers. Like, are you kidding? And I think I've said this before on the podcast, but the only way I've ever detected ovulation is through the Oura Ring, and not a paid sponsorship or anything by any means, but the basal body temperature seems to be the most accurate way for me to kind of track it. But with a lot of ovulation tests, it confirms it after the fact, kind of, because it does the patterns and all that stuff. So it kind of confirmed it a few days after I ovulated, and then I was like, okay, let's see if it's real. And then exactly 14 days after I ovulated, I got my period, and I'm just in shock. I think I've maybe ovulated 3 times in my whole adult life since I was 13. And so I'm just, it's very cool, but it's also I'm finally done with my family building journey.
Right. I think
and of course that would happen.
And, with PCOS, it's not like people never ovulate. It's just really hard to track, especially when you're trying to get pregnant. It's you could be trying for so long, and who's emotionally, physically got that capacity to wait that long, potentially years to have that ovulation, or have that, you happen to have sex on the day that you ovulate. And
totally.
I think the Oura Ring is so cool. Love that you do that. And that's not helpful for everybody with PCOS, because they can see these temperature spikes all the time. But everyone's different, and I think that's just so awesome.
Well, now I guess because I've ovulated, a handful of times since I've had it. Before my last IVF journey was when I was really tracking it. And so now it picks up patterns for my specific body, which is how I guess it confirmed it after the fact, because it matched it with a previous pattern. But it's very mindless because you just wear the ring. You don't have to. I always would get really frustrated with ovulation strips because they never really worked for me, and I never knew when to take them. And so, shameless plug for the Oura Ring. And just crazy.
The key point in that, it's sort of retrospective. It's hard when you're in it, trying to time it for intercourse to get pregnant. But if you're just looking for information about your cycles, are you ovulating or not? For retrospective information, it's very cool.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. And I did not miss having my period because it's been over a year at this point. But I'm trying to tell myself it's a healthy sign of my body's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's always a good thing.
Her story unfiltered, raw, real, and rescripting women's health, one powerful story at a time.
Anyway, I am really excited to share Abby's story. Abby is my co-founder at Rescripted, and she like me, has been through, she has 3 IVF babies. We like to joke that we have half a dozen IVF babies between us. And she also had preeclampsia with her twin pregnancy. So let's dive in and hear her story.
The third trimester of my twin pregnancy was anything but ordinary. I was commuting 30 minutes to and from the office every day, trying to get comfortable at my desk while two tiny bodies stretched and pressed against my ribs. I napped in my car during lunch. I spent meetings shifting in my chair, constantly excusing myself for bathroom breaks. There was even a cushioned bench outside my office where I sometimes laid down with my laptop when no one was around. My office wasn't built for pregnancy, and it showed. At 30 weeks, my friends at my baby shower looked at my swollen ankles and asked, "When was the last time you saw your OB?" I started Googling, remembering a friend's experience with preeclampsia. At my next appointments, I asked my doctor about it again and again. My blood pressure was high, but without protein in my urine, I was told I was fine. Still, I left each visit uneasy, knowing something wasn't right. Then, one afternoon, I got a call. My latest test results were in. My doctor's office had found protein in my urine, but no one had called me. I only found out the next morning when I followed up myself. I was told to get to the hospital immediately. Hours later, I was sent home. That night, I woke up to the left side of my face drooping, like I was having a stroke. We rushed back, and by morning, I was on a magnesium drip. It was go time. Max and Annie were born at 34 weeks and 4 days. Looking back, I feel lucky, but I also feel angry. My story isn't unique. Too many women go unheard. We need better monitoring, more research, and systemic change. No pregnant woman should ever have to fight to be heard.
Yeah, so going through this last pregnancy with Abby, our babies are 4 months apart. I know that she was really nervous to experience preeclampsia again because, I mean, when you have like a traumatic experience like that, almost like, I don't want to say like near death, but just really, you know, life altering, the next time around, it's like, I don't want that to happen again. And obviously, a singleton pregnancy is very different than twins, but yeah, can you speak a little bit to preeclampsia and some of the research there and how much people should worry if they're wanting to get pregnant again?
For sure. So, first and foremost, preeclampsia is pregnancy-induced high blood pressure. It sort of
Mm-hmm.
exists on a spectrum that starts as like gestational hypertension, and then as it gets worse and you start to spill some protein in the urine, it becomes preeclampsia. But preeclampsia is the pre of eclampsia, which is actually pregnancy-induced seizures. And so I sort of feel like one of the whole points of prenatal care is like checking blood pressure and urine samples every time you go in the office to screen for this condition to avoid eclampsia.
Yeah.
The treatment or the cure is delivery, but when this diagnosis is made preterm, it really requires inpatient management, at least initially, to weigh the risks and benefits of remaining pregnant for fetal maturity versus delivery for the health of the mom and the baby, just depending on what the growth looks like.
Yeah.
And I think one of um, the big components of prevention is understanding who's at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know, did she have preeclampsia previously in a prior pregnancy?
No, the twins were her first.
Oh, okay. So, um, so twin pregnancies are particularly at high risk for preeclampsia.
Mm-hmm.
About 10% of twin gestations will
Oh,
get
wow.
preeclampsia. So doctors really should be on high alert or have a higher index of suspicion when there's even mild signs of this. And that doesn't necessarily mean like urgent hospitalization, but close interval follow up. Maybe need for home blood pressure monitoring or, drop, weekly visits to make sure that there's no development of protein in the urine, and sometimes evaluation in the hospital to see if delivery is warranted. It sounds like she went to the hospital, for concern for preeclampsia, and I think every situation is a little bit different, so it's hard for me to say like, oh, why did they do this? But when you have somebody who's got risk factors,
Mm-hmm.
you've got to be careful who you send home versus watch a little bit longer.
Yeah. And what are the implications like postpartum and just I guess do you have to keep watching out for, your heart health and all of that?
Yeah, so usually they like patients with preeclampsia, if it doesn't resolve pretty quickly, like right after delivery, there's like shorter interval follow-up postpartum, and especially if like starting a blood pressure medication is needed, shorter interval
Mhm.
follow-up, like maybe not waiting until the 6-week appointment, and like monitoring blood pressures at home. In most cases, it just completely resolves by that point. You can taper off the blood pressure medication, but um, patients who've had preeclampsia are at higher risk of developing like hypertension later on in their life. And that doesn't mean that you need to like start an intervention now, but having your yearly follow-up with your primary care doctor, getting, making sure your vitals or signs are being checked, meaning your blood pressure, you're getting, your lipids checked, and
Yeah.
just a general health assessment, so
Mhm.
that if there's any signs of hypertension developing, that it can be treated. Unfortunately, hypertension is usually like a silent condition in a non-pregnant person. And, it's only until like it gets really, really bad do people start getting headaches and, at risk of stroke and all these things. And that's really
Yeah.
rare, but, just a plug for, preventative care visits, especially when
Mhm.
you've had, preeclampsia in the past.
Yeah. Are you an advocate for like asking for potentially more than just the 6-week postpartum visit
Oh,
if
for sure.
needed?
I don't
Yeah.
think the postpartum period is like a one size fits all. I
Mhm.
think that there's like a standard 6-week postpartum visit, and that's like fine for people who are doing well.
Yeah.
But patients who have complications, like extensive lacerations or, tears at delivery, or have preeclampsia, have mood disturbances, like they need closer follow up. And I think that there's a
Yeah.
big push from the American College of OBGYN to, you know, to implement personalized postpartum care. It's not one size fits all, but I
Mhm.
think it's probably a little bit practice dependent on how they implement this. But that I think this probably comes a little bit from patients advocating for themselves, like, hey, like I'm not feeling normal, or I would feel a lot more comfortable if I had like one visit in between, before the 6-week visit, like a check in for my.
Right. I had a postpartum hemorrhage, a delayed postpartum hemorrhage with the twins 10 days after I gave birth. And so this time around I was like really nervous. I knew that it was less likely because it wasn't twins, but hearing my doctor say, if it will make you feel better to come back at 2 weeks, like you are more than welcome. And just hearing her say that was just peace of mind. like
Oh,
I,
sure.
I was like, I don't want to wait till 6 weeks if I have any red flags or any warning signs.
And I feel like some people take like that 6-week postpartum visit as like a mandate. Like I cannot reach out to my doctor for 6 weeks. And that is
Right.
certainly not the case. If like you are not feeling well, you know, you should be, it's technically it's a, I wouldn't say it's a risky time period, but it's a time where your body still doesn't feel like yourself, you're like itself, and there's so many mood changes, so many changes in your life, and
Mhm.
bleeding symptoms can happen. Like if you develop an infection, you shouldn't be trying to tough it out to the 6-week visit. I think that's if you have a concern, I think it's
Yeah,
important to bring it up to your doctor.
absolutely. Like we go to the pediatrician starting at week 1. Like we should, in certain cases do the same for new moms. I was just trying to find I saw recently that ACOG actually released new guidance on US prenatal care and delivery, recommending that um, physicians conduct a comprehensive prenatal needs assessment for pregnant patients, ideally before 10 weeks gestation.
Like,
Um,
hallelujah. I want to talk about this actually.
yeah,
We're talking, I'm going to like sort of skip. This will be a really good segue into our next section about miscarriage. I
yeah.
see a lot of patients with recurrent pregnancy loss. It's,
Hmm.
maybe it's close to 50%. I don't know. I see a lot of patients with recurrent pregnancy loss. And
Oh, wow.
it, the, you know, patients don't see their OBGYNs until 10 weeks of pregnancy. And I think that, we meaning me and you, have sort of had the unfortunate luxury of not having to wait the 10 weeks to see a doctor to monitor a pregnancy. Like I've monitored myself and had my own doctor through my fertility practice. And you were seeing a fertility doctor,
one of the silver linings.
The one silver lining. But you can imagine that like the rest of the world who doesn't see a fertility doctor, they have a positive pregnancy test. And they're like, okay, like now what? Like all my friends, I'm the first person they tell when they're pregnant, because they're like, well, now what do I do? Like, I don't see my doctor for like a full month. And I think that early pregnancy care is really lacking, because like, what if they have bleeding? They have to go to the emergency room. What if they don't have an OBGYN? Like, what if they're having a miscarriage? And people are really sort of forced to go through this by themselves, often without the help of an OBGYN. I mean, if they have an OBGYN, they certainly can reach out, but it's not like they like a programmed part of their prenatal care. And
it almost, like, thinking about it, it almost assumes that if you're gonna have a miscarriage, like, we don't need to worry about you,
right?
Because you're gonna come after a safer time. Like,
yes. And I have felt this way for a while, which is why, I see patients who, they've had a miscarriage or two, and it's like, let me, like, if they even aren't having, recurrent pregnancy losses, but have had a loss, and I'm like, just let me, and they don't need like treatment. Like, just let me know when you're pregnant, and I will, monitor you, just for that extra piece of like reassurance, which
well, even HCG levels and stuff, like, healthy doubling, like that stuff gives you a lot of peace of mind in the beginning.
Own your health. Ask us anything. Your questions and expert answers, because you are your own best advocate.
Segueing into that, one of the questions we got was, can stress, exercise, or sex cause a miscarriage? Because I think so many people blame themselves when they have a loss, and that's, I don't think, necessary, but I have felt that.
Of course, I think the first place where your head goes is like, what did I eat? How did I sleep? What did I do? You're like backtracking like the last, 48 hours of your life, even longer, to try and figure out like what you did to cause this, when in fact, like, you did nothing to cause this. Like way over 50% of losses are due to just like random chromosomal error, like too much DNA, too little DNA, and that baby unfortunately was not destined to grow to be like a full human being. And so, like, one, sex cannot cause a miscarriage. Two, exercise is great for fertility and pregnancy. Now, I wouldn't go start like training for a marathon or trying to like go up in like size of weights when you're newly pregnant, but exercise at the capacity that you're used to doing pre-pregnancy is not going to cause a miscarriage. And then the part that I think is really important, that was I was alluding to, just a few minutes ago, is that like the stress, and stress is a really complicated one. Like, stress is not a cause of miscarriage, but it is an important factor that can be associated with increased rates of miscarriage. Now, like, a key thing is like, it's important not to be stressed about your stress. Like, that won't do you any good. And mild to moderate stress levels, or like an isolated stressful event, are not going to increase your risk of miscarriage. But like chronic, long-term psychological stress that impacts your quality of life, like both your mental and physical health, can lead to alterations of your hormones and immune system, which potentially increase the risk of miscarriage. And we know that,
I always tell myself that, like, if you couldn't get pregnant in a stressful period, like, no IVF patient would get pregnant. I mean, it's just so stressful.
Right. That is true. And, I think that, like, or we know that for patients with unexplained recurrent pregnancy loss, just providing extra support, like progesterone supplementation and weekly ultrasounds, improves pregnancy outcomes. And this really has to be in part due to some stress reduction. And so, like, back to what we were just talking about, how like that early pregnancy care, for some people, that reassurance can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. I know someone who just went to a different OB's office than her actual OB in early pregnancy just so that she could go earlier. Like they would take her earlier. And that's, just shouldn't happen. Like I feel like if, especially if you're like over 6 weeks and like there would potentially be a heartbeat if you went, I don't know. It just feels like if it'll give someone the peace of mind, why not just let them have that?
Like a blood draw or an ultrasound or something. Yeah. I mean, I definitely have had, I've heard, through, other patients that, they like their OB sent them for an ultrasound with radiology, and that was helpful. But I was thinking about another episode that we had recorded when we were talking about the movie Joy, like the start of IVF, and how there was like that ovum club.
Yes.
I have like one afternoon a week where I see a bunch of women with recurrent pregnancy loss, and they don't know that they are in this club in my head. But these are like my recurrent pregnancy loss girlies that I love, and I see them every week. And on the one hand, like I don't feel like I'm doing much for them. I'm just like monitoring their pregnancy. I'm seeing them every week, but then. And these are like real deal recurrent pregnancy loss, and they're all graduating and they're having, 10 weeks, like beautiful pregnancies, and it's clearly doing something. And they're
I want to like
kids,
start a support group.
right? It's sort of like they don't know they're in the support group, but in my head, I'm like, these are my girls that are coming to see me like every week. And, I think that it's really, it's awesome. So I love that ACOG put out a statement. To be honest, I didn't read the full thing, but I did see the headline and I read like the little blurb about it. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, especially obviously for first-time pregnancies, but also, in cases where you've had like a traumatic experience prior, like knowing you don't have to wait like 6 weeks till your next ultrasound to just have that peace of mind, or, that you're going to have a delivery plan by 28 weeks that makes you feel at ease for the third trimester, like whatever it is. Like every stage of pregnancy, there's like different anxieties, and just knowing that every time you get to one, you're going to like get that peace of mind for the next, say, 4 weeks or whatever it is. It's just huge. It's like such a game changer.
And I mean, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I feel like gone are the days of like, oh, I didn't know I was pregnant. Like this generation, like wants to know all the information at all times. Like hence like the Oura ring, like we want all the information. And so, that you're pregnant, like the minute you are pregnant. And so, when you are going to the OB for the first time and you're like 8 or 9 weeks and you find out you had a miscarriage, like you in your head feel 8 or 9 weeks pregnant, which maybe to like in the whole picture, maybe 8 or 9 weeks isn't a long time, but knowing you're pregnant for, over a month, emotionally, that's a long time. And, but they probably, in most cases, like the loss actually happened probably closer to 6 weeks, like the pregnancy is measuring really, really small. And so if they had that information sooner, they would be on the road to save some time. And heartache. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The club no one wants to be a part of, right?
Exactly.
So we're going to chat about postpartum mood disorders. And this is like something that I was so cognizant of this time around, because I had really bad postpartum anxiety and even a little bit of like postpartum OCD last time. And it's scary. And I think what I'd love to like gloss over is just the fact that IVF and infertility can be a risk factor, because I know with me, like I finally got my babies, but then I sort of was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop a little bit. And it is a risk factor for postpartum mood disorders, and sometimes motherhood doesn't always look like you think it's, or you dream it's going to, when you're in the throes of infertility, and that's okay.
I feel like most of the time it doesn't, you're like in the 6-week postpartum period and you're like, what is happening here?
Yeah,
it's not what you pictured. and you could be told, a million times that, it's hard, but when you're focused on like just getting to the point of a delivery, you just goes in one ear, not the other. And so it just can be shocking. And hard for someone to even come to terms with the fact that they're struggling with this.
Mm-hmm.
Postpartum depression is probably the most common thing that we see, but it's like 9% of pregnancies have, some sort of postpartum depression, and 50% of them will happen within the first month of delivery. But you can develop these mood disorders later than the first 6 months of being postpartum, but it's certainly less common, but possible. The two main risk factors for postpartum depression or like mood disorders are, one, depression or anxiety during pregnancy, or a prior history of depression, or either perinatal, meaning like antenatal or postnatal, or non-perinatal, like any history of depression. So for this reason, like anybody who has pre-existing mood disorders, I strongly encourage them to establish care with a psychiatrist and or a therapist in the trying to conceive phase. Like you really want to like get your team, your support system in place, because the trying to conceive phase is stressful, pregnancy can be stressful, and then in the postpartum phase when you like really need that extra support, like you don't want to be like searching for a psychiatrist in that time.
That was me. I was having really scary thoughts and I couldn't find a therapist, and I needed one like that second.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I never want anyone to be in that position, because it was just not, I was like, how could it be this hard to find a therapist?
Yeah.
But it was really just that I felt so panicked,
And you have so little time to like think about yourself in that time period. And like the moment that you feel like, okay, like I have 3 seconds to make a phone call to like reach out to a therapist, and like I can't even find one, so it's really about like equipping yourself with some resources, with some tools, so that, if you feel like you are at risk, at a time point where you can actually think about that, so if you do need someone, you know who to call. I think that's huge.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point, to establish care, like even when you're just trying to conceive, and just set yourself up for success, because I think a lot of people are like blindsided by it, for sure.
For sure. And, I think that, at the 6-week postpartum visit, that, you take like a postpartum depression survey, that's certain. I don't think that's, that's not going to screen for all postpartum mood disorders, but the OBGYNs do have like emergency lines like that they have access to, or to give to patients. But also, if you're having trouble finding a therapist, I'm sure that, every doctor has got like some net of other doctors that they, know to like make a phone call, like, hey, I've got this patient that's really struggling. Do you think you could fit her in? And so, I think that using your OBGYN as a resource specifically in that postpartum period, like you don't have to do this alone. Like, one, there are support groups, but two, like your OBGYN can be an advocate for you and help you navigate this process when you don't have the capacity to think clearly.
I'll never forget, my kid's pediatrician was actually the one that flagged it for me. I was 8 weeks postpartum, and they had a questionnaire at the pediatrician. And she's like an angel. I've been seeing her for now almost 7 years with the twins, and now I see her with the baby. And I like credit her with, like, she was like, you need to get on medication. You need like to take care of this baby. Like, she just was so, you don't need to feel shame. Like, this is what, like, I don't know. It just really changed my perspective, because I think a lot of us are like, I don't want to go on medication. I don't want to, but in that moment it was like, okay, no, you're like, this is what you need to do, and that's it. like no questions about it.
Yeah. And I actually forgot about that. Like, when I was postpartum and going to the 1 week visit, and you get the little screen and you like answer the questions, and they do ask you about that, which I think is really a good place for it. But, that being said, also, if they like, if there was something that the OBGYN office sent you to, in that, in that immediate postpartum period, to just screen who needs to be seen sooner. Would be a good thing as well.
Absolutely. So honest conversations with your doctor, again, theme of the day, like you don't always have to wait till the 6-week appointment.
Yeah, it's not a
to have that
mandate.
conversation.
Not a mandate.
Yeah. Well, so I love these segments with Anna, our resident registered dietitian. Today we're going to be talking about cortisol face, which is like TikTok trend that everyone thinks their cortisol is high because people on TikTok said so. So let's hear what the truth is.
Is cortisol face real? Well, yes and no. Yes, cortisol is absolutely a real hormone with real physiological impacts that can sometimes include swelling for some people. There is also a very real condition called Cushing's disease, and one of the hallmark symptoms is what's described as moon face. All of that said, listen, we all experience cortisol spikes throughout the day. Some of those are normal, desired spikes. Like first thing in the morning, we want our cortisol to rise to wake us up and rev up our immune system. Other times, the spikes are less desirable, like when we stub a toe or get stuck in a traffic jam. So outside of having Cushing's disease, it is very unlikely that anyone would experience swelling in their face from these daily fluctuations in cortisol. So while cortisol face is not something most of us have to worry about, chronically elevated cortisol is definitely something most of us should be paying attention to. Modern living, from processed food to chemical exposures in our environment to the go culture that prioritizes productivity over rest, all of this can contribute to chronically elevated cortisol, which can show up in a variety of ways, from bad sleep, irritability and anxiety, to high blood sugar and abdominal weight gain. These things are very real and can be addressed with some simple daily stress management.
Love that explanation. I love her too. She's the best. Well, it's so there was actually a former episode on one of maybe like 2 seasons ago of the podcast where I actually go in depth with Anna about nervous system regulation. But that was a really big game changer for me on my fertility journey when I was taking a break from IVF, because I don't know, I'm just such a go person, and I was like waking up and I was like working out before I even had anything in my stomach, and then I was taking care of kids, and then I was working all day, and then I was taking care of kids again. Like I just wasn't giving my body any chance to chill. And I think like you see it online. Well, you see 2 ends of the spectrum online. You have cortisol face, you need to reduce your cortisol. And then you see like rest is actually productive. And I prefer the latter because I think in today's day and age, like, everything's so go. And everything's like, we don't feel like we're being productive if we're hanging out and watching Netflix or whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, like our body needs rest too.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess another key theme from today, like don't stress about your stress and do things that make you feel good and help to promote stress reduction. When that might look different for everybody. Like maybe not everybody feels like they can meditate or do acupuncture, but maybe like walking outside or, finding an exercise routine, having a lunch date or something, you know what I mean? Like just finding something that makes you feel good and allows you to sort of like take a deep breath and feel calm. I think like working towards an overall stress reduction, this isn't going to happen. It's not something that happens like in a snap, like one thing, one day.
No, that's so true. Don't stress about stress. Cause I would get all stressed about missing a workout, but then I was like, that's counterproductive. So yeah, no. Well, thank you, Anna, as always.
Women's Health in the Wild, must reads, must sees, and must tries for your wellness journey.
So the Women's Health Initiative has been in the news lately, and kind of wanted to dive into what it is and sort of their biggest research study to date, which is all about HRT. I think we touched on it briefly in another episode, but there's a lot of misinformation about HRT and how, it causes breast cancer, and it, isn't good to basically go on in menopause. And I think that's like largely been debunked. So can you go into, what the research says and how it can actually be neuroprotective for women?
Yeah, yes. So the Women's Health Initiative was a very large landmark study that was conducted a couple decades ago. It was a randomized controlled trial that enrolled tens of thousands of menopausal women and randomized them to hormone therapy, estrogen or estrogen plus progesterone versus placebo, with the primary outcome of cardiovascular disease. And the study has been analyzed and reanalyzed multiple times for different outcomes, not just cardiovascular disease. And, the findings showed that hormone therapy use in postmenopausal patients 65 and older was associated in increased risk for a lot of different things, but also dementia. And I think that these were like really big headlines that scared a lot of people away from hormone therapy. And I think, I still see it in my practice today that people are really against hormone replacement therapy. But there are some really key limitations here in that, one, most of the women in the study were over age 65 and more than 10 years out from menopause. And that really doesn't apply to most of the women who are taking hormone replacement these days. And so, when the Women's Health Initiative data was reanalyzed to look at women that were really closer to the onset of the menopause transition, really like 5 to 10 years out from the final menstrual period, these risks really didn't apply, and there actually were found to be multiple benefits. And so, I think we're talking a little bit about dementia specifically, and some recent studies that are showing that estrogen actually has a neuroprotective effect within a critical window, meaning if hormone therapy is initiated within the early years of onset of menopause, again, like 5 to 10 years of the final menstrual period, there is actually a decreased risk of later life Alzheimer's disease compared to women not using any hormone therapy.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the use of HRT in the menopausal population is really for treatment of vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes, sleep disturbances, and not for primary prevention of dementia. And the recommendation for the use of hormone replacement therapy is like the lowest effective dose for the shortest duration possible within the early years of menopause to help with these symptoms. But I think these newer studies are just really helpful, because the Women's Health Initiative study initially just scared so many people away from HRT. But now that we're using it in the right way in this younger population, those scary findings actually just don't apply. And there's just lots of potential benefits.
Awesome. Yeah, I think women sort of in their 50s now are following like different accounts online that are kind of debunking the fact that HRT is harmful. And I think there's like a movement towards more women taking it and just feeling better in those years of their life.
Yeah. I mean, even this week, I saw a patient who was in her early 40s who came for IVF and was really nervous about the hormones because she was worried about the risk of breast cancer. And I was like, whoa, a lot of wires are being crossed here. Like, one, IVF does not increase your risk of breast cancer, and two, like that the study that you're kind of referring to was in women that were like 65 years old, like 10 years out from the onset of menopause, and you're not even in menopause at this time. So, I think that like the headlines really scare a lot of people, and the wires get crossed, and you start like applying one headline to another like aspect of your life, which can be really dangerous and prevent people from, treatment that they actually need. It can be beneficial and safe.
Yeah. Love it. Love the new advancements. again in women's health and just continuing to educate. That's why this podcast is so important. So, well, thanks again, Jenna. And we'll chat soon. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to From First Period to Last Period. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our future conversations.
And don't forget to share this with your friends, because when it comes to women's health, we all deserve to be informed, empowered, and supported.
Still have questions? Email community@rescripted.com for a chance to have yours answered on a future episode. For more science-backed women's health content that meets you exactly where you are, head to rescripted.com or follow us on social @HelloRescripted.
We'll see you next time with more real stories and expert advice.